What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Russia's largest real estate developer, Samolet Group, has publicly asked the government for financial support. And at first, this may look like another corporate problem, another just giant company that expanded too aggressively, borrowed too much and now just needs help. But in reality, this story is much bigger than one developer. Because when the biggest construction company in the entire country starts asking for state money, it usually means that the problem is not inside just this one single company, but inside the entire economic model that allowed that company to grow in the first place. This is why today's story matters so much, because for months we have been talking about the warning signs inside the Russian economy. Inflation, rising overdue payments, pressure on banks, and the government that just keeps spending more money to maintain the illusion that everything is under control. But what we did not have was just one simple visible crack in the wall that explains all of it at once. Samolet Group is that exact crack. Construction is not just another industry, because when construction slows down, it spreads through the banks, mortgages, engineers, and thousands of small businesses that only exist because someone is building a new apartment complex and somebody else is buying everything that goes inside it. So when construction begins to shake, it becomes one of the clearest signs that a larger slowdown may be coming. And in Russia's case, this is even more important because real estate became one of the main beneficiaries of the wartime spending boom, where military contract bonuses, salaries of the soldiers, and inflated expectations created a bubble that looked like prosperity from the outside, but was actually debt, state money, and fear disguised as growth. And now that very same bubble is starting to deflate. And Putin will be extremely lucky if it only deflates and not bursts. Because we all know what happens when real estate crash affects the economy. Guys, by the way, if you ever thought about giving a try to our Patreon, where you can see these episodes in early access and where there is an additional chapter at the end of each video, now is the perfect opportunity because you can try it completely for free for limited time. The link is down below, see it for yourself if there's anything you like there, and well, thank you so much for your memberships, because this is the best way to support our work we do here on YouTube. Thanks so much, let's continue. Here's where it gets interesting, because construction is one of those industries that reacts before almost everyone else. And that is why Samolet Group asking for help is not just a real estate story. It is an early warning sign about what may be coming next for the broader Russian economy. When people feel confident about the future, they buy cars, they sign mortgages, they take long-term loans, and just in general convince themselves that their income will keep growing. But when that confidence disappears, inevitably, those decisions are the first ones to be postponed, because nobody wants to give away their savings and take on a 20-year debt obligation if they are not even sure whether they will still have a stable income or even a job next year. This is why housing and cars are barometer industries for these kind of economies. Because a restaurant can still be full, shopping malls can still look crowded, people need clothes and they need to eat. And people can still even book vacations, even when the economy is weakening underneath them. But the moment families stop buying apartments, new cars, stop taking mortgages, and developers cannot sell what they already built, you begin to see clearly what the headline numbers were hiding before. In Russia, the housing market was not boosted by normal demand alone. It was boosted by government spending, because money from military contracts, signing bonuses, and compensation payments entered communities that had never seen that kind of cash before. And for many families, this became the very first time in their lives they could imagine making a down payment on their own apartment that they like. Then you add preferential mortgage programs on top of that, and suddenly apartments that would have never been sold under normal conditions, they became sold. Houses that would never have been built under normal market demands, they were built. And developers started believing this demand was permanent rather than temporary. But when demand is created by state spending, artificial credit conditions, and short-term expectations, guess what? It can disappear much faster than it appeared. Immediately, because it was never based on real productivity growth in the first place. It was never based on healthier economy or, people becoming substantially wealthier by their own achievements. And that brings us to the real structure of the whole bubble, because Samolet did not appear out of nowhere, and neither did the demand that allowed companies like it to expand so aggressively. Now here is the part people most miss, because a bubble is not created only when prices go up. A bubble is created when everyone in the chain begins acting as if tomorrow's money already belongs to them today. And that is exactly what happened inside Russia's wartime economy. Government spending pushed money into the system, company profits increased, military-related incomes increased, and many people began experiencing what economists call a wealth effect. Whereas someone who used to make, 50,000 rubles a month, which is not that much, like $600-700 per month, and now suddenly makes 150,000 rubles, and now they just begin to believe that this is not temporary, this is a new direction of life. And once somebody believes that 150,000 rubles will soon become 2 or even 300,000 rubles, they do not just spend what they actually have, they start spending what they expect to have. And that is where the danger begins, because expectations become collateral in people's minds, even when banks and balance sheets do not work that way. The same logic spreads across the economy. A restaurant owner sees every table full and, guess what, opens a second branch. Even if the long-term conditions are very not favorable, because owner believes the crowds will keep coming. Chefs and waiters now receive higher wages and begin spending more. Suppliers expand because they see more orders. And before you even know it, the entire chain is making decisions based on a future that has not even actually arrived. The same happens with housing as well. A person sees their income jump or a big influx of money, like signing a military contract, and just even sees an attractive mortgage offer and hears that the prices will only rise, and guess what? They just convince themselves that even if the payments are uncomfortable today, it will become somehow manageable tomorrow, because their salary will mysteriously just keep growing. Inflation will make the debt feel smaller, and the government will continue supporting the market. Then that apartment purchase creates even more demand behind it, because a developer starts building another construction. Engineers, architects are hired, crane operators, they go to their works, furniture factories produce kitchens, tables, chairs, sofas, air conditioners, and every person in that chain starts making decisions based on the same assumption. This is how the bubble feeds itself, as every participant expands on borrowed money while assuming demand will continue indefinitely. Then the moment income just stops growing, the picture changes. The person who hoped to make 200,000 or 300,000 rubles is still making 150,000, except now they might be paying 100,000 rubles a month towards these loans, which means that their real spending power is now closer to the original 50,000 rubles again. And that person is no longer a buyer of a 10 million ruble apartment, no matter what the marketing brochures say. So prices have adjusted to artificial demand, but real demand has fallen. And that creates one of the most dangerous situations in the economy. The market still priced for optimism, while households are already living under pressure. And once that pressure spreads from apartments to everything else, to cars, restaurants, services, and small businesses in general, the problem stops being a housing correction and becomes something much larger. This is where things take a fascinating turn, because the Russian government did not just stimulate the economy and walk away. No, it created a loop where budget spending generated temporary tax revenue, and that temporary tax revenue made the system look more sustainable than it really was. When the government spends enormous amounts of money, some of that money comes back through taxes. Because if, for example, a factory worker, contractor, or a military employee receives more income, well, it just makes sense that this money is spent in stores, restaurants, car dealerships, and housing markets. And every single one of these transactions creates value-added tax, income tax, and just other revenue streams for the company, for the state, I mean. So at first, yes, government spending can create the illusion that it is financing itself, the state pays more, people spend more, businesses report higher revenue, tax receipts go up, and officials can point to the numbers and say, look, the economy is adapting, even growing, and proving stronger than expected, even though what is really happening is that the government is pushing money into the economy faster than the economy can ever produce real value. But once the government can no longer maintain the same level of spending, the loop begins to work in reverse. Spending slows, consumer demand weakens, companies earn less, tax revenue falls, and the state suddenly receives less money exactly when it needs more money to support the very same system it created. This is especially dangerous for Russia, because oil and gas revenues have been under massive pressure. Debt is becoming more and more expensive, and regional budgets depend heavily on income tax, while the federal budget relies heavily on value, other taxes. Which means that when people and businesses stop spending, this entire damage reaches both local and federal levels. And this is why the construction slowdown matters so much. It's not only about apartments remaining unsold, it is about fewer mortgages, fewer construction contracts, fewer salaries, and more pressure on banks. Because once households and companies begin struggling to service their own debts, the financial system starts carrying problems that were originally created outside the banks. For at least the past 18 months, if not more, almost 2 years I would even say, a large part of Russia's economic growth has depended on government borrowing, federal loans, bonds, and repo operations involving the Bank of Russia. But bonds sold at high interest rates do not disappear. They become future obligations, and the state must pay interest on them year after year. If the government borrows at 15%, then next year it may need to borrow even more just to service already this debt, what it already had borrowed. And every year of debt finance growth makes the next year even more expensive. It's literally the avalanche effect. Russia spends tomorrow's money to create today's activity, and now tomorrow has arrived with higher debt, higher inflation, weaker demand, and indices that expanded for a level of consumption that may no longer even exist. And once this system slows down, the question becomes not whether there will be pain, because there will be, but where the government decides to place, on who to place this pain. Now here's the catch, because there is no clean solution for this kind of crisis, and every possible response creates different groups of victims. If the crisis is allowed to resolve itself naturally, then Russia could face a classic bubble deflation, where investment falls, demand falls, entire industries begin falling rather than just individual companies. People lose money, and the pressure eventually reaches the banks. This is where stagflation becomes the nightmare scenario. In very basic understanding, stagflation means economic slowdown and high inflation at the same time. Once again, the worst case scenario, which is extremely dangerous because the normal tools literally stop working properly. If the Bank of Russia lowers rates to keep businesses and households borrow, inflation skyrockets, accelerates at least. But if it keeps rates high to contain prices and inflation, businesses cannot invest, consumers cannot borrow, and the economy weakens even more. This is the kind of situation that Elvira Nabiulina, the governor of Bank of Russia, and Sergei Chemezov, the head of Rostec, have both warned about in different ways long time ago. Because when the key rate is already extremely high and debt levels are heavy, every percentage point matters. In a normal recession, cheap credit can sometimes revive demand, but in an inflationary crisis, which is where Russia most likely is heading, cheap credit can push prices even higher and then also weaken the currency, which means policymakers are stuck choosing between two bad outcomes rather than one good outcome, one slightly worse. And Russia's situation is even more difficult than the United States in the 1970s, because today's Russian households and businesses are already heavily indebted. So falling consumption is not just about people going to fewer restaurants or buying fewer appliances. It is about whether borrowers can even continue making required payments at all. If enough borrowers cannot pay, banks face not just lower profits, but potential waves of defaults. And even if one major developer, like for example the one mentioned in this episode, Samolet Group, is manageable on its own, even though it's huge, a broader wave across entire country, across borrowers, developers, households, become a much bigger threat. The second option is to weaken the ruble. In theory, this helps the federal budget because all revenue is earned in foreign currency but spent in rubles. So $100 per barrel at 80 rubles per dollar equals 8,000 rubles per barrel, and $40 per barrel at 200 rubles per dollar also equals $8,000 per barrel, blah, 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 blah. From the government's perspective, devaluation can make lower oil prices look less painful in ruble terms, but the cost is inflation. Because imported goods become more expensive, domestic producers raise prices, people lose purchasing power, and savings are damaged, if not obliterated. Russia already remembers Black Tuesday of December 16, 2014, when currency pressure created panic behavior. But today, the key rate is already extremely high, which means the Bank of Russia has less room to shock the market with a dramatic rate increase. The third option is to force the Bank of Russia to lower the rates and allow the economy to refinance itself through cheaper loans, which may prevent some defaults in the short term, but would also mean accepting inflation that could reach around 20% or more, and allowing the ruble to weaken even further. We have even fourth potential option, which is the idea associated with Sergei Glaziev, where the Bank of Russia would directly finance essential and military factories, bypassing the normal banking system, creating demand through state-directed production, and treating the economy as a wartime machine. This, yes, may produce short-term activity, but it risks turning the ruble into a currency people receive but do not trust, where official prices become detached from reality, forced allocation replaces normal markets, and even food stamps or direct access to goods becomes more meaningful than wages. So, as you can see, every single option we just discussed leads to suffering. Let the bubble burst and banks and households suffer, devalue the ruble, and inflation punishes savers and workers. Lower rates and prices may accelerate, directly print money for state priorities, and the system moves closer to a controlled economy where the currency itself loses credibility. Putin brought Russia towards the brink of financial collapse and, as always, quietly stepped aside, letting other people take the blame. Typical Putin's strategy. But what happens when this fake boom reaches its limit? Let's try to answer this question right now. Let's focus on this question in this chapter, because there is something deeper going on. And this is the part that explains why the current crisis feels so predictable. Russia's wartime boom was never a normal boom, because real growth creates productive capacity, while this kind of spending creates temporary activity, distorted prices, and long-term obligations. A country can overheat its economy with military spending for a while and call it growth, because factories, yes, they kinda keep working, workers get paid, GDP even numbers may look better than expected, but the question is not whether money is moving, the question is what the money produces. If money is invested into machinery that helps farms harvest more grain, software that increases productivity or infrastructure that lowers transport costs, then yes, the economy can and will benefit later. But if money is invested into military equipment, tanks, drones, that's just literally destroyed in the war, and that's it, well, then the spending may raise nominal output today, while leaving behind no productive asset tomorrow. That is the central problem. Russia took labor, materials, factories and budget money and redirected a huge portion of it into an effort that does not create long-term wealth. And even when that spending raises salaries in some sectors or fills restaurants in certain cities, it still does not change the fact that the underlying productive base is being strained. Foreign investment has withdrawn, labor shortages have intensified, exports are under pressure, costs have risen, and the economy has been asked to behave as if everything is fine, while the basic inputs of normal growth have been deteriorating. That is exactly why the prosperity always looks artificial. The busy restaurants, new apartments, expensive cars and higher wages in selected sectors were real in a kinda narrow, limited sense. Because people really did spend money and companies really did receive orders, but the source of that demand was unstable, and the entire system borrowed confidence from the future. And now this future is here. The government borrowed, companies borrowed, households borrowed, developers built, banks financed, suppliers expanded, and many people assumed that either the conflict would end, incomes would keep rising, or the state would always support the system. But guess what? None of those assumptions can be treated as guaranteed anymore, if ever. This is exactly why Samolet Group asking for help matters so much, because it shows that the crisis is beginning exactly where a debt and expectation bubble would be expected to crack first, in real estate, where confidence, credit, and long-term income expectations matter more than almost anywhere else. And this also explains why the situation can spread. So pay attention, this is exactly how it works, it just makes sense. If developers stop building, workers lose income. If workers lose income, consumer demand falls. If demand falls, small businesses suffer. If small businesses suffer, tax revenue falls. If tax revenue falls, the government borrows more. If the government borrows more at high rates, future budget becomes more fragile, and if the banks are left holding more of these troubled loans, the entire financial system becomes the next pressure point. That's literally the domino effect. That is the danger of a bubble. When one link weakens, pressure spreads through the entire chain. Once dominoes start falling, there is literally no stopping. So, what does this all really mean? It means that Samolet Group is not just a company asking for help. It is a symbol of a much larger economic moment where Russia's wartime spending model is beginning to collide with the limits of debt, inflation, high interest rates, and a budget that cannot endlessly replace genuine growth with borrowed money. This fake economy was built on state spending, debt, and expectations, and when these expectations are not met in a short period of time, the entire illusion falls apart. As a result, Russia faces several choices where one is worse than the other, and if the last remaining foundational piece starts shaking, if the real estate bubble begins to deflate, then it is not just about whether the collapse will happen or not. It is whether how severe the damage will be, and whether Putin's Russia will be able to recover while he's still the president. Guys, please make sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, because we will continue following this story closely, and in the next videos there will be even more important topics to discuss about Russia's economy, the pressure inside the system, the war itself, and the consequences that are now starting to become visible. Don't also forget about our Patreon, the link is down below. Thank you so much for watching, see you on Monday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe